So there you have the two calipers for the passenger side, right-hand side. Fronts and the backs, they look to be about the same size, but they're different because on the front, this is where your brake line comes in, and as it sits on the car, it sits in about that position, which puts the bleeder on the top. So it sits actually on, if you're looking at the car, this is looking from the inside of the car. It would be from about 9 o'clock on a clock to about 12 o'clock. So that's how it goes, and the bleeder screw's got to be on the top. So these are only able to be put on one side, because if you reverse it, it puts the bleeder down here on the bottom, right there. So they do matter which side you put them on. The rears, however, they can go on either side, but you have to make an allowance for how they're installed. Looking at this, they go maybe from about, if you're looking at it from the inside of the frame, from about 11:30 till maybe 2:30 on the clock. And you can put them on either side, but the bleeder screws must be on the top. So this one was set in like that on the passenger side, approximately. Bleeder screws are on the top. On the bottom, you have a plug on one side and the inlet for the fluid on the other. And again, the way these are mounted, bleeders have to go on the top. Now you could switch this to the other side, but you would have to move the plug to the outside and the inlet for the brake fluid, brake line on the inside. So I'm going to clean these up, and then I'm going to paint them with caliper paint. Let me move the camera a little bit here. There's some glare off of that. Tool chest. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the pins out that hold the brake shoes in. And theoretically on these Corvettes, you can change the brake shoes without even taking the caliper off. There's only one little trick to it that might be easier said than done in terms of replacing them on the car. And that is that there are springs inside the pistons of the calipers, and they want to push the brake pads up against the rotor. So if, and I can actually show you what's happening here. Let me get this pin out, you'll be able to see it better. But this is a cotter pin. Normally they're clips. Apparently whoever did this last, and I don't think it was me because I don't think I worked on the rear brakes of this car. I think I did the front. They put a cotter pin in here anyways. And of course it's going to be difficult to get out. It's not rusted in, but the way it's bent, it just doesn't want to come through the hole. get it with my straight pick. I'll make sure that's in the frame before I do it. If I take the pick and get it through there, I might be able to get it started. And then it might be easier to get the pliers in there. To pull them out. And the pin comes out. And normally if that was sitting on the rotor, these brake pads would not fall out the bottom side. They'd sit on top of the rotor. And then you just pull them out. Now, you should be able to see what happens to the pistons here. I'll bring it closer. They want to pop out because there's springs behind them. So there's a little metal tool that you can slip behind there. Just bleeding the brakes, pumping them like that. There's a little tool you can get to place behind there so that you can push those back both at the same times while you reinsert the pads. But that's the one thing that's kind of problem when you try to replace them on the car. But it saves you from bleeding the brakes and everything. Now, what I want to show you on this one, and I can't because it's also a cotter pin, I wanted to show you the type of clip that they use for the stock installation. So basically what they use to hold that pin in, that holds the brake shoes in, is a mini hitch pin. Much smaller than this, although this one actually looks like it would work. This hole's pretty big. But they just do that, and that keeps the pin from sliding out, keeps the brake shoes in position. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to clean these up real good using probably a combination of a wire wheel to get this rust off, and then simple green to get all the oil off so that I can paint it with caliper paint. I've got some spray caliper paint that I'm going to use to paint it with. And what I'm going to do is, since you really can't see this inside, I'm not going to worry too much about getting that painted well, because once you put it on the car, brake shoes are going to be in like that, brake pads will be in like that. You won't even see any of this. I will try to get some paint on it, but I'm going to paint these while they are still together, and then bake them on, and then take them apart and rebuild it. Hopefully I won't damage the paint job when I do this, but the advantage I think to doing that is I can spray paint in here where those pistons are, and I'm going to replace those anyways. I already bought the kits to convert it to O-ring instead of lip seal. So I'll clean it up, paint it, take those out. Those will act actually as my masking since everything there is throwaway. And then hopefully when I take it apart, it won't mess it up too bad. And if it messes it up near these bolts in the process of taking it apart, then I'll spray it again and cure it again, and hopefully I'll end up with a nice looking job and don't have to worry about the masking. I will see how that works. In the past I've done it by taking them apart first. The only issue I might worry about is where these separate if I get paint in there and then take it apart. I'm not entirely sure how that paint is going to react. What I might do is just, once I get it done, painted, and it starts to dry, I don't know where I put my razor knife, I just had it, but I'll take a razor knife and just score the paint so that when I take it apart it separates nicely. So that's my plan. We'll see how it works. Okay, a little bit of a change of plans here. These things get really heavy when you're trying to hold them on that wire wheel. And so I decided that I can take them apart. For now I'm going to leave the pistons in. But I can take them apart, and if I want to put them back together to paint them, I can do that. Just not put them together with the rebuild kit in it. So I'm going to break these into halves to make it easier to wire wheel them. Okay. That Milwaukee 3/8 inch impact wrench doesn't appear to be good, and I did it over on the half shafts on the flanges. When it's more than, I don't know, 50 foot-pounds or something like that, doesn't seem to want to. Oh, wait a minute. Hold on. I'm doing the bad thing again. I have 4 settings on here. I had it on number 1. Works much better that way. Son of a gun. So that will make it much easier to hold those while I'm trying to run it on the wire wheel. And as I said, when I go to paint them, there's really one place that it makes a difference. There's an O-ring right here. Hopefully that was in the frame, but there's an O-ring right there. That's actually the seal between the 2 halves of the caliper. And that's where the fluid flows from this through that hole and gets into these pistons. So I can put it back together and not put the rebuilt O-ring in there if I want to paint it as one. And I can still leave these in to have them act, as I said, as basically masking for those cylinder holes. And I may change my mind because it's going to be important not to get any of the caliper paint contaminated with the brake fluid, because it's not fully conditioned and set for it to resist brake fluid until you bake it. So I am going to go back to the wire wheel and continue to clean that. So there's one caliper pretty much cleaned up as far as wire wheeling is concerned. I'll have to clean it with some simple green. I did not get in here yet because I need to do that with a drill with a cup type wire wheel on it. So I didn't do that yet. That'll just take 5 minutes. And one of them will be done. So that maybe took at most a half an hour, and it was a good move to take the two halves apart because it was nowhere near as heavy, and it was easier to get into these areas with a wire wheel. And when I say wire wheel, it's just a wire wheel on a motor, and it's a pretty well worn wire wheel with that, but that's what I've been using. So got some chores to do, so that's going to be it for today, but looks like maybe 2 hours more and I'll be ready to wash them down and spray them with caliper paint. So went fairly well. I'm sure I'll add some video as I do the others and come across some things I want to mention. So this is the front caliper I'm starting to take apart. And there's a difference between the front and the rear. The rear caliper bolts that held the caliper together, the two halves, are 5/8 inch. The front calipers, they are 13/16. So it's a much bigger bolt. These are on there tight. It's probably going to have to put them in the vise and use a breaker bar. Before I go sticking that in a vise, which I'll probably have to do to tighten them, but before I do that, I'm going to try my air impact wrench on it. Yep, that little one just doesn't have the juice to do it. So I'm on the last half of the last caliper, and it suddenly occurred to me that I might be going about this all wrong. I was trying to do it in a pattern, just going over, you know, from one end to the other. And the thought crossed my mind that if I try to get into all the nooks and crannies first, I'll actually have a bunch of the stuff that is not a nook and cranny cleaned just because of accidentally hitting it while I was trying to get into the nooks and crannies. So the nooks and crannies are what take the time anyway. So I will finish this up and let you know how it went. Well, it seems like it's going quicker. Here's what I've done, nooks and crannies. And a lot of the stuff accidentally got hit, so I think the rest of it's going to go quicker. So I've got all of the calipers cleaned. What I'm going to do now, instead of using something like Simple Green, I'm going to use brake parts cleaner. I'm going to spray those off. Then I'll come in and I'll spray the bottom of them today, let it dry overnight, flip them over, spray the top side and blend it in, and then I should be able to bake them to cure it. So there's my spraying area for the calipers. I've got it set so I can walk to all sides of them. I can just leave them there, and I'm going to spray the bottom and as much down the sides as I can. And then after it's dried tomorrow, I'll flip them over and do the same thing on the other side. And I should be able to get everything covered that way. Not too concerned about the bleeder screws. I'll probably replace them. I may not if they don't get ruined. But I've put in the old brake lines from the rear to seal off the front calipers where the brake line goes in. And you know what, now that I'm talking about it, I believe I have a couple of spare plugs, because right now the two places on the rear calipers where the brake line goes in are open, and I don't want paint to get into those threads. So I'm going to dig out a couple of old bleeder screws, put them in there, or plugs, whatever I have to keep those from getting paint in them. Okay, I found two things that'll work for that. One is a plug over here, and one is an actual fitting from an old brake line. New fitting, but I cut the brake line off for some reason. I just needed the tube, not the brake line fitting. So here we go. I'm not going to show you the painting of the whole thing. I'm just going to do a little bit. And then I'll walk over to the other side, to the top of the inside from there. On the side here. That's what I'll do on all of these today. Then I'll flip them over tomorrow, and I'll do the other side. So don't believe that I mentioned what kind of paint I was using. It's VHT high temperature caliper paint. There's the 4 calipers painted on the bottom side. As I said, I'll let that dry overnight. I'll come down in tomorrow, flip it over, paint the other side. Once that dries, This says that you have to bake it in a 200-degree oven for 1 hour in order to cure the paint. So it won't hold up to chemicals. And by that I'm probably mean brake fluid until you've baked it. So that'll be the next step after we get the top side painted and it dries. It has to be completely dry before you bake it. And I probably will take out the pistons and separate the halves of the calipers to bake them. So the calipers have been drying overnight. I'm going to put on a clean pair of gloves to check to see if it's still tacky anywhere. I'll leave less of a mark if it is. Those are nice and dry. Okay, I've already taken the 2 hoses out that I used to keep the threads clean here. I'm going to flip these all over so that I can do the other side. Okay, I'm going to reverse these so that I have a good angle to get that side of the inside there. Uh-oh. A little bit of brake fluid on there. I gotta get that off. Clean it off. There's an indentation in here that didn't get hit so good with paint. I try to do those by tipping it a little bit. Do that on all of them, and then I will coat this outer surface. One done. We'll just go around and do the rest of them. Okay, so these calipers have dried overnight. Appear to be kind of ready to go. What I'm going through now doing is making sure all the bleeder screws are loosened before I bake this paint on. Oops, that's got to turn the other way because it's opposite. So I'm loosening the bleeder screws. I think I'll leave them just a little bit cracked, just so that there's no chance that any of the baking process cures that in a closed position. Because that might be hard to get out if it does. So, after gently breaking all these loose, there's a couple of the fittings that I put in that are different size. So then the next move will be to take the two bolts that separate the calipers, or that join the two halves of the calipers together, take those out and separate them and get the pistons and stuff out of it, because they have rubber parts in them, and I don't know how that would react at 200 degrees. I suspect it would be okay, but I'm not taking any chances. If you recall, I put these together with an impact wrench, but on a very low setting, so it shouldn't be too hard to get off. Famous last words. So, I'm going to take these halves apart. I don't know whether I'm going to bake the finish on those two bolts that hold them together on or not. Be hard to get in the oven, I guess. That's my only issue, but maybe it'd be nice to have them somewhat nice looking. They won't be great because in order to get them off, I had to put a wrench on them. But okay, now I'm going to take apart the other. Oops, that's a different size. That was a 13/16 bolt. I'll need that 5/8 for the rear one from the other side. That one appears to be on there a little bit tighter. I might have to resort to an impact wrench on those. I didn't want to do that because I don't want to nick up the paint on the bolt, but it is what it is. So I'm going to first take out the mounting bolts off of this front one. So that I can separate, and then get the impact wrench so I can separate the halves, because there's something I want to show you here. I believe these calipers in the front were rebuilt with O-ring seals in the past. I think the guy that did that was me, but the rears didn't have an issue, so I didn't rebuild them. I want to show you the difference in how they function and what I believe to be the reason that the lip seal calipers that were on the original Corvettes suck air in, but I need to get that other caliper apart first. So remember to up the power on my little impact gun here so that I don't think it's running out of juice. to come out, I'd have to resort to these other. What the heck is going on with these things? Reset the battery. It's still on full power. Oh, you know what? Ha! These work the opposite of my Craftsman impact wrench, so I was tightening. Gotta learn your tools. Okay. Looks like just a little tiny bit of brake fluid might be dripping out of that one port. So I don't want to get that on any of the paint. It'll take it right off. Okay, so turn this over and zoom in a little bit, and I'll show you the difference in these two calipers. The rear ones, again, are still the lip seal. You notice when I push it in, it springs right back out. The fronts, can't even hardly push it in, but they don't return by themselves. These, I believe, are O-rings. These are the original lip seals. So we're going to pry those out and verify that that is a lip seal and an O-ring, and then that'll be the last part of prepping them for baking the finish on. So if you're an old school guy, you'll recognize that as a brake spoon, and you'll know that that was what you used to adjust drum brakes. So I'm going to just try to get that under that seal and pop it out. Okay, and now being careful not to get any fluid anywhere, because there's, I'm sure, fluid inside there. That's pretty messy in there. Let's see if I can get one of my picks here to do a close-up. On a lip seal. So this is the lip seal, and if you notice right there, there's a lip, and this is the pressure side. When the fluid pushes against that, it expands that lip against the side of the bore in the caliper, and that's what makes your seal. So what's unfortunate about this is there's a spring behind it, and if you have rotor run out, then it pushes the fluid and the caliper or the piston back, and The unfortunate part is now if I move this forward without pressing the brake, which is what the spring does, there's nothing holding pressure against this lip and therefore against the bore of the cylinder. So when your rotor runs out and your spring pushes it back, air can bleed past it. And it's only a little bit, but you can see every time you rotate the wheel, if you have run out and that thing is going in and out like that, and a little bit of air is able to seep by that seal, then ultimately you get a bunch of air. And when you have a bunch of air, you can't get any force on the brake pad because air compresses too readily. Okay, I've taken the lip seal out of there. Hopefully you can see it, but there is, you can see it's kind of in a, looking at it from the side that the piston is on, it's flat and it has this lip on it, but if you look at it from the other side, there's a groove, and that lip is able to be compressed. So when it's getting pushed forward by the spring, it collapses because there's no pressure against this holding it against the bore. So that's my theory on why lip seals suck air in if you have run out in your rotors. And now I will try and pull one of these others out off of the front side. Same technique with the brake spoon. Reach under the lip, pry, comes right out. I can tell already that these have been replaced because the rubber on the seal is what I'm going by. So we'll just pull this out. Okay. Now, this is an O-ring seal. It requires a different piston, so you can't just get an O-ring and slap it in there. But again, it doesn't depend on the pressure of the fluid against here to push the seal up against the cylinder bore, because it's an O-ring and it maintains pressure in or out. So even if this spring were able to push it out, which as you've seen when I took the thing apart, it didn't come flying out. So even if it were able to push it in and out, it doesn't create that easy path for brake or air to go through it when it's coming back out towards the brake pad. So that's my theory why these are better. I think probably the spring can be eliminated, and I know some people do that. I didn't this past time I rebuilt this, but some people do eliminate the spring, and it's probably no big deal because it doesn't push the piston out anyway. So It may help to align it in the bore. That's about the only reason for keeping it, I guess. I'll probably keep it again, now that I've thought that through. But I will take the, oh, there's one more thing that we talked about, is in order for the O-ring seals to work, you need to have had the cylinders re-sleeved with stainless steel. Now, most of them that you'll find today, the cars from a C3 are old enough that most of them have already been re-sleeved because they're not the original calipers. So these were not leaking or anything whenever I took them out. So I'm sure the bore is good and new seals will work just fine in these. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing on all of these cylinder halves, or caliper halves. And then I will take them and bake them to cure the caliper paint. That is a paper towel that has some of the nasty stuff that was inside the rear caliper. So it's a good thing that I'm doing this. Of course, I want this car to be basically as good as new when I'm done with it, essentially for the most part, except I may put off some of the things that would make it better. For instance, I'm not upgrading the calipers, and part of the reason is I'm going to put the old brake shoes on, and every piece that you put on new has a break-in procedure. The transmission does, the differential does, the engine does. The brakes would if they're new. There's a burn-in, or forget what they call it, but there's a procedure to break them in. And with so many different break-in procedures, and I have to do them all at once because the car's not going to run until they're all installed, that's one thing where I can eliminate one thing where I don't have to drive the car in a particular way to break in the brakes. So I figured I should let you see a little tip on how I've been handling the removal of the pistons from the caliper. I've already taken the seal off, but there's a lip on the piston which I will show you shortly, and if you work your way around it, you can bring the piston toward the top. But the problem you run into is when you get so far, then you have nothing to pry on with the brake spoon because it's hitting on the edge and this is hitting on the bottom. So you're stuck. What I've been using is a pair of large vice grips, and you just wiggle and pull, and out she comes. Just a couple final comments. I'm down to my last caliper to work on, caliper half, I should say. Before you bake them, you want to make sure that you get all these little rubber seals out that were separating the two caliper halves and actually forming the seal. Oops, that's history. It went on the floor somewhere. So that's one. Second, I've been noticing that when I've been removing the seals, I can pretty much guarantee you that whenever I pull this seal out on the one that's a lip seal, that piston's going to pop right out. And the ones that were O-ring seals, that thing had to be pried out. So you pretty much, if you're rebuilding them, as soon as that thing pops, and actually even before it pops, if those pistons are going in and out by themselves, you know, if you press them in and they pop back out, can pretty much guarantee that's a lip seal. Doesn't pop out, likelihood is that it's a O-ring seal. If it's an O-ring seal, it's a guarantee, or should be a guarantee, that it's already been stainless steel sleeved, unless somebody did it wrong. So lip seals come out very easily. O-ring seals, got to pry them out. So that's about it, other than me cleaning up the brake fluid that's left inside those cylinders and taking them up to the house and putting them in the spare oven, which only gets used for pretty much Thanksgiving. And I've already got permission from my wife to do this. I suspect there's going to be some fragrances, let's call them, from this process, but she's at work. Hopefully I can air the house out before she gets back. At any rate, after I bake them, which is an hour at 200 degrees, I will come back on and give a brief update on just how bad the odor was and whether I think you can get away with it while your wife's at work. So this is a shot of the stainless steel sleeve. You can see it's maybe a 1/16 of an inch right there. You can see the sleeve. It's not very big at all, but that's what you're looking for to determine whether or not you've got stainless steel sleeves in it. So I'm getting ready to rebuild the calipers now that they've been painted and all. And I have an O-ring piston set for this. And as I read this, it says 65 to 82 front O-ring caliper conversion kit for second design calipers only. I have no idea whether these are second design or how to tell. Hopefully they'll fit. So basically what's in the kit, a couple O-rings, make sure you can see that. They go here and here. Then you have 4 seals, which will have to be installed. I hope there's some directions on which way they go. I think they go this way, but who knows? Maybe it'll be obvious once we get and no, there are not any directions. Don't think they're on the bottom of the box. No, they're not. So we're going to have to wing it as usual. I can tell by the design of the piston there's a place here where the spring would go in. So that is where that would go. I'm not going to use the springs because I've heard other people don't use them, and if you recall when I took these apart, the front calipers already had O-rings and they didn't move like the rears did with the springs. So the spring's not really doing anything, and therefore I'm not going to use it. So we have to put the seals on the pistons. I'll start by dumping a little bit of brake fluid on the seal to lubricate it. Put that down there to focus or aim that a little bit better so that I don't get it outside of the frame. And once I've got the O-ring lubricated, it just slips on. They go on pretty easy. Then you insert them in to the pistons. Oops, and I'm doing it backwards already. I'm going to have to pry that out. Pay attention. I'm glad I didn't jam that all the way in. Okay, pay attention. I'm talking to myself here. The side with the groove for the ring or the spring goes in first. It's as easy as that, really. Then I'm fairly certain that these go on like so. It almost looks like it'd be easier to put that in on the piston first. And I suspect it goes like this. Let's put those on the piston first so that it's easier to get them on. As usual, when I do a video, I show you the good, the bad, and the ugly. I almost did a bad there. Almost did a very bad. But if you can learn by my mistakes, that's great too. So we're going to put that seal on that piston first. Just like so. And then re-lubricating this. Dump a little more brake fluid on my finger and lubricate the piston again since I've taken it out a couple times. Lubricate the O-ring seal again. Push the O-ring into the piston. And now I got my glove caught in there. Probably should tap that in with something that is not going to damage it, like a piece of wood. But it's as simple as that to put the pistons in. I guess maybe I'll video doing one and doing it the right way. Hopefully I can do it in one shot. Okay, I'm going to try to do one of these pistons from start to finish without having to back it out. First thing, lubricate the O-ring with some brake fluid. Slip it on the piston. Turn it over. Get a seal. Pop the seal down on it. A little bit of brake fluid to lubricate the cylinder. And insert the seal or the piston into the cylinder. Whoops, that one went in kind of quick. And what I did on the last one off camera is to pop that seal down. I just used a piece of wood and a dead blow hammer. And it's I will repeat that process for the second half of the caliper, and then I'll come back and put on video the joining of the two caliper halves. So I've got my caliper half in the vise with the plastic protective pieces there. And this is the side with the groove, the machined out part where the O-ring sits in it. This side is not, it's flat. So I like to have that side pointing up so I can lay a O-ring down in that. And here's how I like to do it to avoid those O-rings moving. I'm going to start this bolt. Not so that it won't pull out, but enough that I can lift it up and clear the O-rings. I'll save the other bolt for later. I have to go get the O-rings now. See if maybe I can move this a little closer and get a better view of it, maybe. Let's go over the other side, maybe. Having trouble getting to the camera. I don't know if you can see the slots in the cutouts for the O-rings. That's what I'm trying to get in the frame. Oops, that's not good. Trying to move something and it's caught on the tripod. Okay, let's see if we can get this in the frame here for you. So that's one groove where an O-ring goes. I'm going to back off the camera so you can see the whole thing. Okay, there's the other O-ring groove. They tape those O-rings into the box. It's a good way for packing them for shipment. It's not such a good way for unpacking. So what I'm doing is I'm inserting these O-rings. This one almost looks like it's bigger on one end than on the other. and I just dropped it. I have to clean that off. That O-ring is indeed bigger on one side than the other. Okay, second O-ring down in the groove. Okay, because I have the pocket for the O-rings pointing up, those O-rings are not going to want to fall out. And because I have one bolt in over here, I got to make sure that it's in the frame. I can lift up on, well, I'll insert the other bolt in the other half there, but I can lift up on this side of the caliper, rotate it around while I'm still keeping it up in the air. Start this next bolt still up in the air, and now that I've got them both started, by the way, I should have mentioned, make sure you've got the calipers the correct orientation so that you don't have one side upright and the other side upside down. But now that I've got these in place, I can look at those O-rings, I can see them, I can just drop that down vertically. There's no way that those things can move if I've got both bolts in and I'm using the bolts as my guide. Then all I have to do is, I'll keep some firm pressure on here, take my impact wrench, run them down, now one more step. I have to torque those to the correct spec, which I believe is 70 foot-pounds for the front, but I have to look it up. I was wrong about the specs on the torque. It was the mounting bolts that is 70 foot-pounds. The front caliper for 75 on is 130 foot-pounds, which is quite a bit. So I'm going to have to get out a torque wrench and set that to 130. By the way, those bolts are 13/16. I'm going to do this in some stages. So, that's not good. Okay, I'm going to try a different socket because that one is not seating fully on it because of the shape of the caliper. Okay, I found by the way, they're 13/16 if I didn't mention that. I found two sockets. The deep seems to fit with a little less play. They're both 13/16, so it's one of those situations where I've got to be careful not to slip off. I might have to go get my other torque wrench with more leverage. Yeah, it'll be safer if I get the one with more leverage. It's a longer handle. I don't want to go flying. So I will be back with a different torque wrench. So somewhere on my long trek to the house, I recalled when I was doing my 74 Corvette that I used the 130 foot-pound setting. According to the Haynes manual, it says both front and rear calipers. Okay, so I used that. And the problem is, this is a front caliper bolt, this is a rear caliper bolt. So I looked at my other manual up at the house, and the other manual says the rears are only 60 foot-pound. So in order to not break these bolts, I'm going with 60 on the rear. I'll do the 130 on the front because it's a much bigger bolt. It can take the torque. So I've got the other torque wrench set to 130. Hopefully that's enough leverage to get it there. Yep. I was close with the other wrench, but because it didn't move any before it clicked here. So I was very close with the shorter wrench. So those are together now. They're not going anywhere. This was a front caliper, by the way, in case you haven't figured that out. And this one is ready to go on the car. Well, almost ready. I need the brake line that comes in there and a copper crush washer to be installed. Shut that off while I locate those parts, and then I'll install those. So I took the caliper out of the vise a little prematurely because I needed to put the crush washer in. It's a 7/16. It goes on the brake hose, or it goes into the caliper. And a 5/8 wrench fits on this end right here. Wow, the 5/8. There it goes. I was going to say, the box end fit over it. That's how I tested it. I didn't test it with the flat, the open end. They give you torque specs for these. I don't know how you'd fit a torque wrench on there, so I just get them pretty tight, and it should seal. If it leaks, then possibly you need to tighten it down a little bit more, but that is ready to go on the car. I am going to go squirt the rotor with brake cleaner, and then that'll be ready to go on. So there was one last thing to make sure of before I put this on the car, and that's to make sure that the bleeder screw was free, because I painted it. I painted it, and there was some paint covering that, but I did blow air through it, and it is clear. And if you're blowing air through it, make sure you blow it from the inside out, because you don't want to force anything that might be in there in further than it already is. But that is open, so now I can put that back in. And on the front calipers, I guess it's a pretty cool design because there's only one bleeder screw. In the back there's two. On the front, the inlet's actually near the top when you install it, and the bleeder screw, of course, has to be on the top, otherwise air won't come out. You'll get fluid and there'll still be air in the bottom. But because you have the two O-rings in between these things, when you get a little bit of pressure on there, it will flow through to the other side and then force the air up back through this O-ring and out the bleeder screw. Okay, I was explaining how the fluid flows in this thing. Comes in from the brake line. This is mounted up towards the top, which is kind of weird because you need to get the fluid through the bottom of the air out the top. But because there are two O-rings here and two pathways, fluid will go down, migrate to the other side, get pushed up as it has pressure on it, come through this O-ring and out the bleeder screw. So it should work just fine for bleeding the brakes. So that first caliper I worked on was the passenger side. I'm going to spray the inside of the rotor through the gap where the I'm going to put some more light on this subject before I do that. I'm going to spray it through the inside of the gap in the backing plate where the rotor or the brake caliper goes on, and I'm going to rotate it while I'm spraying it. And I'll clean the front. Okay, once that dries, I'll be ready to put the caliper on. That does not take long to dry. I have to go get a couple lock washers that are left over on the bench. It'll be dry by the time I come back. So I'm installing the caliper without the brake pads installed. You can do it with them, but sometimes it's hard to keep them in alignment. I have two wrenches over here. One is the electric ratchet, battery powered ratchet. Actually fighting because I don't have I've got this the lift is in my way and I can't see where the holes are in the caliper. I'll try the bottom one first. Maybe that'll be easier to see and line up. I'm gonna balance that there and go get me more light. It's tough working in the dark. Okay, so there's the caliper. And I'm trying to line up this hole here. I should make sure that the bolt's going to go through that easily first. It's always nice to know that your bolt can go through. Calipers are fairly heavy. I know the bolts go into the caliper because I had them stored in there. I think that started. The other one. Now, one concern I do have about these bolts and calipers, they say that you're supposed to torque these to 70 foot-pounds. And as you recall, every time I put washers on something and had to torque it to that kind of a spec, it did not go well. It spread the washers. Make sure I've got that straight before I put any kind of a wrench on it, because I don't want to end up stripping those threads. Done a fair amount of work on the caliper, painting it and taking the rust off and all that. I do not want to end up stripping it. I am going to go get a small wrench so I put a little bit of pressure on it, see if it's threaded properly. I try to be very careful about putting power to a bolt before I know that it's absolutely, without question, threaded properly. And that one was not. That's why you don't do it. There's no sense in making yourself more problems by hurrying up the job. Okay, it does go all the way through the caliper, or the mining hole. And I know that it threaded into the caliper because that's where I had it stored. So might be in now. We'll see. Not really. Try it again. It's wiggling with the caliper. I still don't trust that. I'm going to use the power ratchet as a manual ratchet for a while. Yeah, that's in. maybe not. That one definitely is. I think it's going in now. Yep. Okay. Now for the torque wrench, set to 70 foot-pounds. Hey, the washer didn't deform. So that caliper's on, and now the brake pads can go in. I'm using the same brake pads that I had. The reason for that is I've got so many new parts on here that are requiring a break-in procedure. And I just didn't want to deal with brakes being another thing that had a separate bedding procedure, and you're trying to break in the engine, the transmission, the differential, and then you got to add the method of bedding the brakes, and those kind of they conflict with each other. So this takes at least one of them out of the equation for me. Now, on inserting the brake pads, make sure that the metal plate is against the caliper, and the whatever it is, it used to be asbestos, but now I'm not sure what they actually make them out of. But that part has to go against the rotor. And these just slip in. And then the pin can go in. And the pin goes all the way through. See if I can zoom in on that pin for you, where it goes all the way through. And this is where whoever did these brakes once upon a time put a cotter pin in. It's supposed to be like a hitch pin, and I intended to bring those down with me today, but I didn't. So for now, I am going to insert a cotter pin there, and that keeps the brake pads from moving too far. I will replace that with a hitch pin type pin, just because it's going to be easier to take off when maintenance is required. Now to connect the brake line, the flexible hose that goes to the wheel, to the hard line that comes through the braking system. And I'm trying to, there's the hard line. If you recall, I left this a little loose to give me some wiggle room, and I'm not going to hook this in till I get that threaded, because they can be hard to thread because they don't line up, and that the hard brake line is difficult to bend even a little bit to get it lined up. It's easier if you leave it loose. And trying to do this without being in the way of the camera, I think I'm going to reposition it. Okay, hopefully I can screw it in with my right hand better than I can left-handed. But point is, you got to get these things lined up and get that fitting started. I think I have it started. I'm pushing down on the line so that the fitting will be looser. These are hard to get lined up. I'm gonna go get myself a flare nut wrench because I think it's started and I need to find a clip to clip that flexible hose in once I've got it threaded for sure. Okay, that's a 3/8 inch wrench that you're required to use for that fitting there. And you can see it going in very easily. I just didn't have the finger strength to turn it, and many times that's the case. You can't turn it with your finger, but you put a wrench on it and it's just super easy. You wonder why you need a wrench, but there's just enough tension on there from that line to keep you from being able to do it by hand. So now, looks like that is where it needs to be. So one of the brake retainer clips. That does two things for me. It keeps the hose in. It also means I can put more pressure tightening this fitting. Without needing a wrench to hold it, because that slot there is it's got flats on it, and the fitting for the flexible brake line has flats on it that match those fittings. Whoops, make a liar out of me. I am going to need a wrench there because it's turning. I think that was 5/8, and I think I have that right with me. Nope, that was the other end. It was 5/8. I got to get 11/16. The 11/16 is one of those sizes that's not in the Craftsman set, so that you have to buy it at half the cost a set for just that one wrench that you don't have. Yes. Okay, hopefully that's tight and won't leak. Now there's I believe it was a 1/2 inch, and I do have it with me. One of the clamps for the brake line that I had not tightened because I wanted that wiggle room on there. And while I'm over here doing that, I'm going to finish up by tightening that. So those are 1/2 inch bolts holding those lines in place. Tell me that's maybe it wasn't going to tighten fully in that hole. These don't have to be super tight, they're just holding the brake lines in place. So that is it for the driver's side caliper. Appears there was a little bit of grease on the plastic inserts I had for the vise, so hopefully this will clean it off. If not, I'll go fast enough so nobody can see it. So I'm going to go rebuild all the rest of the calipers, and I will video the installation of a rear caliper when I get to that. Okay, as I'm working on the rear calipers, I did notice a couple things that are very much worth mentioning. Number one, the pistons are smaller to give less braking at the rear, and that's fine. But it does make it a little bit harder to get the O-rings on. Second, I think I said that the rear calipers were switchable, but if you look at how they're designed, there's only one path for fluid to get in to the outside half. So I think the outside halves can be switched by just changing the plug versus the bleeder screw. But the inside half is unique to the side because that's got to be on the bottom to let fluid go in both sides so that you can let the air out of the top. It might be theoretically possible to do it on either side, but it would take a lot longer to get fluid through there to fall to the bottom and then pump it back up. It's just not worth it. Another thing is, these being smaller, I do have a 30 millimeter metric socket that is perfect for pounding these seals in. I was doing better with the wood. It is harder to keep this centered on it. So that's what I'm going to use at any rate to pound them in. Those are just a dust seal, really. Keep dirt out of the piston area. Of course, you don't want them falling off or anything like that, but they're not a hydraulic pressure seal. So what I did when I was finished, I did the second front caliper first, and the reason I did that is I wanted to take my torque wrenches that were set to 130 foot-pounds and put them away. And I've already set the torque wrench for the rear at 60 foot-pounds, like my manual up the house suggested, not the 130. Because as I told you before, I think on the 74, I ended up using the 170 because that book was down here, and I just went with it and ended up stripping the bolt. I don't know if it was the bolt or the caliper, I don't really recall, but either way, not what you want to do. Those pistons are already below the level of the caliper. The dead blow hammer works just as well. So now, because this only has one O-ring, I will bolt these together where the O-ring isn't, and then put the O-ring in, put the second bolt in. Before I do that, I have to make sure that all of my bleeder screws are clear. And I did find, hopefully you'll be able to see it, I did find that if you get a small enough drill bit, you can actually see it. And I'll try to do this here. Try to get it in the video. If you look in this hole right here, you can actually see that that's clear. Might be a little bit easier than blowing it out. So I will finish putting this together, like I said, torquing it to 60 foot-pounds because of thinner bolts. And then I will show you an installation on the rear. One last thing, these pads actually have the type of clip that I want to have on them. It's a hitch pin. Make it easier to maintain. And my battery's running out on my camera, so I better shut it off. I'm going to take back what I said about the outside part of the rear calipers being switchable from side to side, because there's only one part of this that has a passage for fluid to get through, and my opinion is, even if you can reverse those and have that on the top, you probably could get it to work, but I think it'd be easier if you put them on the bottom. So that would be my advice. So I want to apologize for repeating something that I saw on a Corvette forum or something about rear calipers being switchable, and from everything I'm seeing in rebuilding these, they are not. Now, I will possibly give the person a break that said it, because maybe they had first design calipers and these are second design. Maybe on the first design calipers, the sides were switchable by moving the bleeder screws and the plug and the inlet, but this is an inlet. Okay, that's the hose that goes actually to the brakes. And this is the plug I used to mask it off while I was painting. Clearly the same thread, but just laid it on here. The plug that was in the other side, if you look at that plug compared to the inlet tube, clearly those are not the same thread. The plug is much smaller. So there is only one threaded inlet where you can use an actual brake line on these. Like I said, maybe the person that told me that had a first design caliper, but these are definitely not switchable side to side. So I apologize for saying that wrong probably a couple times. I'm working on the last caliper that I'm rebuilding, and then I'm going to install one of the rears and video that. I have already sprayed the inside of that rear rotor with brake cleaner. I'm going to put it on. After I've got it on, I'll spray the outside. And you notice there's the shim here. It's got two marks lined up with the 2 marks that I put on the spindle, and then I have 2 marks on the outside of the rotor, which I'm lining up with the spindle, and put this back on. Just putting 3 bolts on because they're going to have to come off to get some tires on it. It's better to have the rotor bolted, held on with some lug nuts, because if you try to put the caliper over it, it's moving and it makes it difficult. Okay, that is that. Now to get the spindle, the caliper up there. Two bleeder screws on the top. Outside has a plug on the bottom. Inside has a spot to connect your line. Now if I can find the bolt I took out of there. These have tooth washers on these bolts. I guess that's okay. Find the other bolt. Just took it off not even an hour ago. There it is. I have to hold the caliper up until I get the bolts started. Feels good on both sides. I'll gently put it on with the power tool. No, I won't, because I need an extension. And I don't have one of those handy. Try to do this backwards. Okay, those are going to be torqued to 70 foot-pounds. We'll need the extension to do that. And I'm going with a 6-point socket because it's less likely to slip off the bolt while I'm putting a lot of pressure on it. So I've got to set up my torque wrench and I'll be back. Okay, 70 foot-pounds. Getting tight. There it is. Other side. Yikes. Not much room to make a swing here. It's just a couple teeth at a time. Makes for a slow go whenever you only get a couple teeth at a time. There we go. Now, I think this is the tube we need on this side. Maybe it's not. And I left the other one over by the bench, I bet, when I was using it as a prop for the caliper connections and bleeder screws and so forth. Okay, I got the other hard line that goes to the caliper. These are a bit different from the front because in the front the hose goes from the brake line to the caliper. In the back, you've got a hard line. And again, these are bent somewhat. In a somewhat usable manner. Let me try the other one again. Maybe I just had it lined up wrong. Nope, that one's at a bad angle on the other side. That's got to be the driver's side. Wow. They should do a better job of bending these. Money you pay for them. Let's make sure we get the correct side to go in there. And you know what? That has to be put into the block, the junction block first. I wonder if I can put this through the hole in the frame where it's supposed to go and get it started there first. Then pull it up through and line it up on this side. So that's what I'm going to try. Don't know if I can get a camera position that's going to be good for that line. Probably do it a piece at a time. Okay, I don't know where this turned off, but what I've done is I managed to get the flexible hose threaded and tightened there. Now I'm working on the other end of the flexible hose to try to get it connected to the hard line. And what I've done, unfortunately you can't see it from there, but there's a hole in the frame that flexible line screws into. It's a tab like this. If you can see, well, you can't see that either. It's a tab similar to this that the flexible line end of the hose goes through, and then you put a clip on it like I did on the front. But it's hard to get those two things lined up. So what I've done, it came back out again, but I'm going to put it back in again, is getting the end of the hard line, and I'm going to push it way through that hole. There we go. Let's see if you can see that. Yes, you can. And then, now that I've got that way through that hole, I'm going to bend the flexible line and start those threads. Once I get it threaded in there, these rubber gloves make it hard. They get caught in the threads. Okay, the flexible line is still through the hole. I'm going to take the hard line and try to start that into the fitting for the hard line. I'm going to crawl under again and see if I can reach it better from underneath the lift. At any rate, as I was saying, my goal is to get it threaded in there and then pull it up through that hole using the hard line as a fish tape, if you will, to pull it up into place. I always seem to struggle with getting the hard brake lines started because you can't really flex them very well. Okay, so I've got that started. I'm going to try to pull that up through using the hard line as a guide to get it to where it needs to go. And now the challenge is to get a hard line in the back of the caliper and get that one started. It's in the back of the caliper, and I now see how the bend is supposed to go. It may be hard to get the fitting into the caliper because of it being misaligned very slightly. Needs to be bent just a little bit. And you have to pull it to get it back into position, and if you got it bent any, it tends to want to bend the other way. Okay, let me reevaluate this. I think I may actually just take the caliper bolts loose. Those may actually be easier to move the caliper a little bit and reinsert those bolts. Somebody said it'd be easy. Okay, and there's the camera. Those washers, I hope this is torquing it to 70 foot-pounds. It destroyed the washers again. Okay, I can move the caliper now. Hopefully I can line that up and get that fitting started. Yep, that's started. Well, that was much easier to start it that way. I'm going to leave it finger tight because, well, for a couple of reasons. I don't have the wrench I need, I don't think. Yeah, I do. But it is started. So, now while I still have that loose, I'm going to put this clip that holds the flexible line to the frame. And I am going to have to somehow get under there and see which way it needs to be lined up. Flat pieces on it that need to go through that hole. I'm going to shut the camera off to save you some time, but all I will be doing is turning that hose till it fits through that retainer tab and goes in with the correct alignment. You can't see it from here anyway. Okay, so in order to show you how this is recorded, or how this goes, I decided to show you the driver's side. I'm working on the passenger side. And it's got a hex-shaped opening in it. The hose has one flat side on it, and the rest is rounded. I don't know if you can see that. Looking right here is a flat. The problem, or I guess it's not a problem, is it fits through there. It doesn't really lock it. So all I need to do is not worry about the alignment of that so much on the passenger side, or this side when I get to it. I don't need to worry about the alignment. All I need to do is get that hose pushed up in there so that I can get a retaining clip like I put in the front on the top side of it, and then it will be in. So it's just a matter of aligning that brake hose, or brake line I should say. It sure isn't easy. But all I gotta do is get it popped through. May have to lift that caliper off and to allow this to move. There's no easy way to do that, because if you don't connect this first, then you have trouble lining up the hose. It almost looks like once I get this in here, if I don't twist it the right way, it's going to get impacted with the spring. So I'm going to work on that. I'll let you know how I succeeded when I succeed. But for now, I'm shutting the camera off. Okay, so what I did, I disconnected the line at the caliper so that I can wiggle this around to any position I need to get it, so I can get that clip on. I had it up through there before. Maybe needs to be turned just a little bit more, and that's the wrong wrench. I thought I brought the wrench with me. I can only get that in. I'll be able to readjust the other stuff. I hope. Doesn't appear to be anything other than the bend of this flexible hose keeping it from on that. Now I lost my clip. Yeah. Oh, there it is. Thought I had it, and then I had to let it go to find my clip, and again it appears to be out of position. Should go right through. The other side did, but I didn't have anything connected to the other side. Hate to do this, but I'm going to take this off again and make sure that that goes through that hole. Okay, so I took the hard line off, put the flexible line through the hole. I've got the clip started. Hopefully it doesn't bounce off whenever I tap it. Okay. There, that is in. Now the problem I might have is getting this line screwed into it. Not going to be good going through that coil spring. Let's see if I can do it. Like this. Well, it's actually threaded in. That is awfully close to that coil spring. but I think it'll clear it, especially once I get it tightened. Now, the trick is going to be to get it routed so that it can be connected to the caliper. Did get it routed, but it looks like it put it closer to the coil spring. Coil over shock. I'm going to see if I can screw it into the caliper and then worry about bending it to fit. Well, it started in the caliper. So I think I have to crawl around to the back. Let's see about the routing. Well, it's a good thing that I'm putting this on with the body off. I don't know what I'd do if I had the body on. Not much easier to bend this line with using the caliper for leverage. Wow. There's no way you can get a tubing bender onto that line closer to the fitting. To make that bend any tighter. You would think Van Steel would design it so that it would fit better with their suspension would accommodate the brake lines. You know, maybe move that tab or something to make it easier. Might have the upper shock or caliper bolt started. I'm going to try it a little bit with the power wrench, but very slowly, very carefully, just to see if I am going to shut off the camera and play with this because this is taking a long time. This is absolutely frustrating, but it looks like I've generated enough clearance that I can clear the coil spring, but not by much. What I'm gonna have to do is try to bend this tubing back around the coil spring. And before I do that, I am going to put a piece of something in between the coil spring and the line so that it can't bend it so that it interferes. But I think that's going to have to wait for another day. Also, as I pulled the caliper out, I found that when I torqued it to 70 foot-pounds with these washers, which split and are ruined now, would appear that those washers damaged the edge of the caliper where they were in contact with. So now these bolts that hold the caliper on don't go through there freely, so I'm going to have to get a drill and clean those out before I can put the caliper back on. Okay, I've got a piece of wood wedged between the brake line and the coil spring, so if I can get that on with that piece of wood in there and then knock it out of there, I'll have about a ½ inch of clearance. So to finish up the passenger side rear caliper, I just have to tighten the hard line that goes to the caliper, the 3/8 inch fitting on it. And I've got to torque it to 70 foot-pounds where the caliper connects to the bracket. And I'm now wondering if I actually put a video of me getting this on here. What happened was when these washers were underneath those caliper retaining bolts, they screwed up the hole in the caliper, and I couldn't get the screws, the bolts, into the caliper, much less into the bracket. The bracket has the threads that the bolt is supposed to catch onto. So when I was finishing it up, what I did was I took the 7/16 drill and cleaned out the holes in the caliper, and then it went right on. So I've already set the torque wrench to 70 foot-pounds. So this ought to be a pretty easy thing here. I've got a very short extension, and hopefully that's going to allow me to get into this other bolt and get some more swing on the wrench. It's like an inch in extensions. Okay, so I had tightened the other end of that hard line last week. So the only thing left to do is install the brake shoes, brake pads. So, put my pin in. My other pad, again making sure that the metal part is contacting the caliper and not the rotor. Once that's through, I brought hitch pins down today, and I've already replaced the 2 4-cotter pins on the front calipers with these hitch pins. And that's a done deal. Now I think I've learned quite a bit doing this side about how I should approach it on the other side. And I should have known this, to be honest with you, because I do it all the time when I'm doing master cylinders. See if I can get a focus in on the place where I have to connect the flexible hose. It's up a little higher. I might need to shine some light on that so that it's visible, but there it is right there. So what I'm basically going to do is I'm basically going to start from that rubber hose, connect the rubber hose to the fitting here. And then hopefully I can, and this is hard because the rubber hose is bent from being packaged. And you got to get it started enough so that you can bend the hose. But get it threaded in. That's the only difficulty with the rubber hose, because it's, in my opinion, maybe just a wee bit longer than it needs to be. Okay, we got it started. Oh, that's the one wrench I didn't bring. I need, I think, a 5/8. And I need a clip to clip that in the other side. So the fitting on that hose is actually 9/16. I am using a line wrench for it. It appears to be substantial and made of steel, so I'm not sure that you actually need a line wrench to tighten this, but I have it, so I'm using it. Next thing will be to put the other end of it into the bracket that it goes to. I don't know if you can see that from there, but I may have to reposition the camera. It's kind of on the edge of it. So there's the end of the hose. I'll try to stay out of the way of this, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to. As you recall, there's a groove in that fitting, and from the other side you put a clip underneath that groove. It's a bad angle to be working from, especially trying to avoid the camera. You got to get it started under there, and hopefully a tap with a dead blow hammer. It'd be a little easier if I wasn't trying to stay out of the way of the camera, but no, it is what it is. Let's see if we can get in from the top. Really doesn't matter which direction it goes on as long as it goes on. Amazed I got that using the hammer left-handed. And the next thing I'm going to attempt to do is connect the hard line into that fitting. And until I get it started, I can turn it any which way. Or can I? I'm going to have to be able to turn it to get it over to where the caliper needs to be. So any which way might be an exaggeration. I'm on the wrong side of the darn coil spring to make this work. Maybe I should have threaded this in before I did the clip on the rubber hose so that I had a little bit more wiggle room. That's started in. Now I gotta figure out how to get it routed over top of the brake rotor, which I might make the job easier for myself. I have to take the brake rotor off in order to spray brake cleaner on it. So if I do that, it's going to make it a lot easier to get that over that. I'm going to take that off right now and immediately go spray it with brake cleaner so I won't forget. Now that'll make it easier to route that back over to the caliper. So as I did on the passenger side, I got a piece of wood, got it in there, used it to bend the line, and it's wedged in there. Hopefully it'll stay, but I'm going to use that as a fulcrum to bend this back, hopefully without kinking. Hopefully it'll leave me enough clearance between the spring and the brake line. Van Steel, if you're going to sell something like this you need to provide a piece of formed brake line that will fit your suspension design, because the stock one, you put your spring right in the way of it, and you made no mention of this in your advertising or anything like that. So you get bad marks on your design from me. Taking out the caliper mounting bolts. Dropped one somewhere. I didn't hear it fall to the floor. And I hope that I don't have a problem when I'm going to connect the emergency brake, the parking brake cable, because they look like it's going to be tough to get in there. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. My wedge fell out. I don't believe I got it bent enough to avoid the springs. But I think maybe I got it enough that I can do it by hand, maybe with a little help from a wedge. See if I can put this back in there. Now that I've got it started to bend, I got it. I believe I have it where it will clear the coil spring. Not sure. I'm going to find that bolt, and then I'll be back to put the caliper on. So the bolt was hung up on the trailing arm. And I almost forgot to put the rotor back on. And remember, I've got to line up the little reference marks that I made. So they're both between the same two studs. Okay. And I'm going to put at least a couple plug nuts on to make sure that the rotor's not moving while I'm trying to install the caliper. Gotta go get another lug nut. So I'll put 3 on. That'll be enough to make sure it's not moving on me. I don't want that wobbling side to side. It'll just make it harder to do it. While I tighten those, I'm going to move the camera so that you get a better view. So the first thing is to connect the fitting from the brake line to the caliper, because I can generate a lot more leverage on that line if I've got the caliper to use more or less as a handle. I can't even get this lined up straight. This is frustrating. But as I always say in my videos, I show you the good, the bad, and the ugly. This is definitely very bad. Not sure it's quite ugly yet, but it's not started. It's not easy holding a caliper that weighs 5 pounds in one hand and trying to line up the threads so that they start. Now I understand the why the instructions said not to weld the shock brackets on until you saw if there's clearance issues. There are definitely clearance issues with the brake lines, but short of moving the shock mounts from stock, there's no real way for you to deal with this other than bending the brake lines, which, as you've seen, is not easy. Oh boy. I gotta see if I can bend that line somehow to give me a better angle. That might do it. All of a sudden I'm working up a sweat. Okay, that is started. Bending the line helped a lot. Now, I still think that once I get this installed, I'm going to have to put something in there and bend that brake line some more. I think I can do it without kinking it, but you know how that goes. Famous last words. So, see if we can get the caliper bolts lined up now. the right amount of pressure on the top of the caliper, I was able to get the bottom bolt started. I think that one started as well. I think I'm going to gently turn that with a socket on an extension just to make sure that's threaded before I put a wrench on it. Yep, I can feel it pulling the caliper up. I don't know if you saw that move, but okay. So let's make sure the camera's still running. I hope I turned it on. I've been talking like I have it on, so I probably do. Yes, I do. Okay, so $70 foot-pounds. I'm prying away on the brake line to get the socket underneath it. Don't want to be kinking that brake line. Pulling down was a lot easier than pushing up. You know what? The long extension's probably going to work better here. Gives me more room. I won't be above the ramp of the lift. So that actually shifted some, so let's turn it back to 70. There's 70. And I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to tighten this up. And then I'm going to work on moving that line some more. It's too close to the coil spring, but I think now that I'm tied in on both ends, and put more pressure on it and bend it. Tighten the back brake line while I'm there. I'll have the wrench in my hand. I don't know if you can see that, but what I'm doing is tightening the line that goes to the rubber hose, the flexible hose. That's definitely going to need clearance there a little bit. And I'm going to go around to the other side, see if I can get better leverage for the breaker bar. I'm sorry, the torque wrench. Actually, I think the best way is going to be to go under the lift with a longer extension and do it from that side. So a longer extension from the other side underneath the lift is going to work. I already used a ratcheting action of a torque wrench to snug the bolt up a little bit. That's why I'm pretty confident I can get it from here. There you go. Now all I have to do, I'll do it on both sides. I'll check the clearance between the brake line and the coil spring and make sure that it's not going to rub. I think I can do it. But right now, this side is definitely contacting the coil spring, so it's going to have to be gently persuaded to bend a little bit more towards the front of the car so that there's clearance. Before I do that, I'm going to insert the brake pads. Pin through the hole on the pad. Again, metal part towards the caliper, braking material toward the rotor. That's all the way through. And hitch pin to hold the pin in. There we go. Other than bending those brake lines a little bit, which I'm not going to video because I don't think you can see anything anyway, but giving myself some clearance, the brakes are all on. So as I was cleaning up and checking things out, I saw that I had neglected to connect the brake line and put the clip in on the front passenger caliper. And now that I've got everything connected, I can actually tighten and a hand hold the trying to hand hold the camera and left-handed tighten the brake lines down. So I'm going to get all of them. Sorry, I'm going to put the camera down so that I can operate the ratchet with my right hand. It's going to go a lot better. I need to get it both hands to get the socket on the nuts or on the bolts. So at any rate, I'm going to tighten up the front brake lines that I left loose so that I could wiggle the brake line over here into place to bolt it up. So I tightened all these clips for the front brake line. So that means everything is done on the brake lines. I have the calipers on, and on the back, and all I need now is to mount some wheels, and I'll have what's known in the business as a rolling chassis.